I'm sorry, but Superman is white.
Mr. Reagan.
So apparently, J.J. Abrams is making a new Superman movie, and this time the rumor is Superman is black. So here we go again. Another opportunity for Hollywood to pathetically virtue signal only to make a terrible film that everyone hates. There are several theories as to how Superman is going to be written as black. Some have speculated that Superman should just be cast as black, just black Clark Kent, and everybody else would remain the same. And that's bad. That's not good. And I'll explain why in a minute, but it may actually be even worse than that. They may actually be making, and I'm not joking, Obama Superman. That's right, Obama Superman. I'll explain in one moment. First, of course, I have to sell you something. An estimated 188 million Americans have set New Year's resolutions for 2021. The top resolutions revolve around health. Probably no surprise to most, considering what's happened in 2020. The way that I'm sticking to my health resolutions in 2021 is by ordering from KetoWithReagan.com. It's my personal favorite supplement because it makes it easier for me to control my weight. And I'm going to be honest with you here. I've had this for some time, right? This Keto Elevate. And this is amazing stuff. And I've got a confession. I haven't been taking it as much as I should. I used to take it every morning with my coffee, but then I stopped drinking coffee and I started drinking tea in the morning, and I stopped using it, which was a huge mistake. And I feel like I haven't lost as much weight as I could have had I been taking that and the collagen. I actually used to take both of them in my coffee, and I stopped taking them for a while. And it's been a while since I've taken it, so I'm actually going to make a resolution now to start taking these again. But I do love these. I actually genuinely think they're great supplements. So go ahead and get some of this. Go to KetoWithReagan.com. That's KetoWithReagan.com. Get the best keto diet powder for 51% off today, or click on the link in the description below. So in 2009, a prolific comic book writer by the name of Grant Morrison developed a black Superman, a Superman from another dimension, and he's called Calvin Ellis. So this writer, Grant Morrison, well, he's a complete lunatic, and I suspect he writes pretty much everything either high on drugs or drunk.
Okay, I'm pissed, and in half an hour I'm going to come up on drugs, so watch for it. Suddenly, I found out that if you do these things that you're told by Aleister Crowley, by Wilson, if you actually do what they say, things happen. The universe we live in is designed to grow larvae. Magic works. I'm talking about quantum physics. I'm talking about taking control of things from the quantum level up, from the molecular level up, and it works. This magic works.
Either way, he should definitely not be writing comic books. But anyway, he created this black version of Superman who also happens to be, in his dimension, the President of the United States of America. Yeah, no joke. And look, this is not a good take on the Superman character. I've skimmed through some of the storylines, and it just isn't good writing. Why do they keep hiring terrible writers for comic books? I mean, I don't know, I guess because they're all radical leftists and they appreciate activist writers more than good writers. One thing that is particularly cringy, Obama Superman is not called Clark Kent, he's called Calvin Ellis. But he's still Kal-El from Krypton, son of Jor-El and Lara, just like the original Superman. I mean, he is Superman from Krypton. It's the same exact guy, but he's black and he's called Calvin Ellis, which, I mean, that makes no sense at all, but whatever. Anyway, his name is now Calvin Ellis, which Superman's Kryptonian name, remember, is Kal-El. So for Kal-El to land on Earth and be adopted by the Ellis family and called Calvin purely by chance, so now he's Calvin Ellis and Kal-El. I mean, that's a hell of a coincidence. I mean, I feel like this stuff is being written by a 9-year-old. That's what it seems like. Apparently, this name Calvin Ellis is an homage to an early Superman alias from the 80s, but I don't care. This is lazy writing. It's bad. It is very, very bad. But the hack who created this absurd character, Grant Morrison, did admit that it was really just a Barack Obama version of Superman. So, I mean, I guess he didn't think he had to put that much effort into developing the character. It was just an overt political statement, which overt leftist political statements appear to be the death of creativity. So I guess we can't expect this to be good writing. Anyway, this leftist drug addict created Obama Superman, and the suspicion is that this is the direction that J.J. Abrams is going with in the new film. But Black Superman hasn't actually officially been announced yet. And so at this point, this is all just rumor. But why? Why do people think that this new Superman is going to be black? Why is this rumor out there at all? It's because of this guy, Ta-Nehisi Coates. This guy's a writer for Atlantic Magazine who was brought into the comic book world to write for Black Panther. His Black Panther stories, they got mixed reviews. Some people liked them, some people didn't. But Marvel, well, they liked what he did. And they brought him in again to write for Captain America, which he proceeded to absolutely massacre. And what I mean by that is that he did an abysmal job, and everybody hated those comics. They were universally despised. In his first attempt at writing for Captain America, Coates makes the villains Trump-supporting uber-patriot white nationalists, and he makes the heroes, and I'm not joking, Antifa. Captain America isn't even really part of the story. He's resigned primarily to watching this clash of evil Republican Hydra and, heroic Antifa. I mean, his Captain America was really just an excuse to inject his race-baiting radical left political crap into a popular comic book. And that's really the primary reason that Ta-Nehisi Coates is not a good writer and why he should never have been brought in to mangle the legacy of Superman the way he's mangled the legacy of Captain America. And one more thing, and perhaps the most important thing, Ta-Nehisi Coates is a racist. Warner Brother Pictures has hired a legitimate racist to write their next Superman movie. And, of course that's awful. Racism is terrible. But you know what? I don't actually dislike this guy. And you might think, but Chris, shouldn't we hate racists? That's America today. Racism is pure evil. And I don't actually think racism is learned either. That's what everybody says, right? Racism is learned. I think racism actually comes from a natural tendency to feel more comfortable about those who raised you. It's something that is very easily twisted into hate, and that can be a very nasty thing. But if we're going to hate every racist, I mean, we basically have to hate most of Japan, most of China, most people from Africa, South America, the Middle East. Basically everywhere you go in the world outside of white countries, racism is part of the culture. It's integral to most societies. So no, I don't think that racism is the worst thing in the world, and I don't hate racists. We just demonize it here in the United States. We glorify the hating of racism. But sadly, not all racism is equal in the United States. If a white person is racist, of course, they're the devil. But if a black person is racist, they get a pass. And I don't think that's right. But in the case of Ta-Nehisi Coates, I actually don't think his racism comes from a place of pure hatred for white people. Rather, I think that in his case, it is actually learned. Ta-Nehisi perpetuates the racist attitudes of the modern-day left verbatim. He essentially regurgitates the racist rhetoric emerging from American universities. He is an academic racist. His racism is all about how white people are irredeemably evil. In a way, he's as much of a victim as anyone. He's joined the cult. He's soaked up their crazy ideas. He's shaved his head. He's drank the Kool-Aid. And now he prays at the altar of wokeness.
In America, there is a notion, I think, that most people want black people to succeed, that there's goodwill, and that we just have these sort of moments that we trip over that don't allow for black people to succeed. But Du Bois's notion in that particular paragraph was, in fact, black failure is, in fact, what the system is designed to produce. The whiteness, as I've explained or tried to, elucidate in my work, is not a fact of ancestry. It's not a fact of biology. It's a fact of power. And in America, in order to have white people, you necessarily have to have a group of black people who are demarcated as below them. White people define themselves by the fact of white people being below them.
But the guy's a nerd. I mean, listen to him speak. He was probably terrorized in school by bullies. I think he grew up in Baltimore, so probably black bullies. But now he's super popular among the cool kids in the left-wing media. All because he writes about how evil white people are in the Atlantic. And so this has really benefited him personally, to perpetuate the myth of the evil white man, the myth that never before in American history have we been so irredeemably racist against black people. Jim Crow, slavery, those were just appetizers to prepare for the main course, the unbelievable white racism of 2021. So anyway, it might not be entirely his fault that he's such a vile racist, and yet he is a vile racist. And this is who they hired to write the new Superman movie, a vile racist. It's crazy. But regardless of the vileness of the writer, I am 100% against any major movie studio investing hundreds of millions of dollars in a blockbuster film that makes Superman black, Obama Superman or otherwise. I think this is an awful idea, and here is why. Iconic characters are iconic because of a very specific set of values. The entire Superman mythos has been developed over time to become one of the most beloved fictional characters in the history of the world. Why? Well, there's no one reason. There's a variety of reasons. Superman has gone through several iterations. Through the years, the writers of the Superman comics have experimented with the character, the supporting characters, the origin story, the super environment, his enemies, his weaknesses, just about anything you can imagine, the writers have played with, twisted, explored, and reworked. And almost all of these changes have failed. Superman always goes back to Superman. Lois is Lois. The origin story always goes back to the one we all know and love. He flies. He's got laser vision, x-ray vision, cold breath. Kind of a weird one, but whatever. It's one of them. Super strength and super speed. His alter ego is Clark Kent. His parents are John and Martha Kent. He's from Krypton. His weakness is kryptonite, and his arch enemy is Lex Luthor. And he's a white man with black hair. And that's it. Forever and always. They're always trying to reintroduce new characters like Crypto the super dog and, mix in a variety of other things that nobody cares about. But you know what sticks? The good stuff. The stuff that made Superman so beloved. That stuff was all introduced pretty early on, and it really hasn't changed much since then. The 1978 movie affixed most of the basic stuff, and a good example of introducing stuff that doesn't work is in the final fight scene in the sequel film, Superman 2. Most people who grew up in my era, well, we love this film. But people forget that Superman was given a bunch of new superpowers in that final scene. He can create multiple holographic versions of himself. He can wield some kind of force beam. He had a cellophane S. Which is more of a gadget, I guess, than a superpower, but whatever, that was one of the weird things. In that film, he can also wipe women's memories by kissing them.
What was I talking about before?
I know you. It's probably about Superman.
Oh, him again.
Oh, Clark, you gotta stop being threatened every time the guy's name's mentioned.
The reason that these changes don't stick is that they're just not great. They're not as good as Superman's standard characteristics. Changing Superman, even in small ways, may not be offensive or irritating, but it just doesn't stick because people don't like it. Even when they change Superman's costume, people get upset. And you want to change his race? Changing Superman's race would be like giving Santa Claus a blue suit. Nobody would accept that. Are people bigoted against blue suits? No, that's just not Santa Claus. When Daniel Craig got the role of James Bond, people complained because he was blonde. I didn't really understand this myself, as Daniel Craig has more kind of like light brown hair, and James Bond had previously been played by Roger Moore, whose hair was, I thought, just as light as Daniel Craig's. But I guess it was a big deal. The point is that people go crazy about the tiniest change to characters that they love. This is natural. And look, if it's something as massive as a character's race that's changed, well, it's not racist not to appreciate this change. It's normal. It would actually be far weirder if people saw that their favorite character looked completely different and said nothing. If you love something, you love it the way it is. You don't want it changed. That's how people are. It would be odd if you woke up tomorrow and your spouse or your children or your mother was suddenly a different race. Well, a lot of people considered beloved characters from fiction, especially from their childhood, in a similar way. They love them, to some degree, like they love their own family. Consider the character of Blade. Blade is a black samurai vampire. He's awesome. If you made Blade white, well, I'd be just as annoyed. Blade is black. I'm sorry. That's just who Blade is. And that's true. I would genuinely actually be upset if Blade was made white. This is not an issue of racism. The racism accusation is such a tired cliche. Nobody believes it anymore. And it's just becoming nauseating. But most importantly, it's just wrong. In fact, even when they adapt novels into films and the characters are brought to life on the big screen, people are always disappointed in the actors that they choose because nobody's vision of a character is the same, out of a novel. And so filmmakers must always contend with the actors they choose not looking exactly like the popular characters that people have imagined. This happens even when filmmakers make every effort to make the characters look exactly like what the writer envisioned: race, gender, physique, clothes, etc. And you know what? They actually did hire an Asian actor once to play Superman. And he actually did an amazing job. Dean Cain. The show he was in was epically popular in the 1990s.
How do I find you?
I'll be around.
But here's the thing. Despite the actor being Asian, they didn't make Superman Asian. I mean, the intention was not to change the character. They just found the best actor to play the character at the time, and they hired him, and he played the character brilliantly, and nobody even thought about the fact that he was part Asian. I'm not even sure anybody knew. At the time, I was actually annoyed with that version of Superman, but not because of Dean Cain, but rather because the writers had written Clark Kent too cool. One of the key things that I felt as a young boy that distinguished Superman from Clark Kent was that Superman was cool and Clark Kent was a nerd. And if you read the very first Superman comic book, it's all there, right from the very first story. Clark Kent pretends to play a cowardly wimp in order to help disguise himself. As far as I was concerned, this was a defining characteristic of Clark Kent. And Dean Cain was just too damn cool. Now, I'm sure that he could have been more of a nerd had the writers included it in the show, but that didn't happen. And honestly, Clark has been too cool in just about every iteration since then. He was too cool in the animated TV show, he was too cool in Smallville, he was too cool in the new Zack Snyder movies. He's just too cool these days. Like the MAGA movement, there really needs to be a Clark Kent movement among comic book nerds. Make Clark Kent nerdy again. I mean, it's so much better for so many reasons. Comic books are particularly beloved by nerds. Give them a nerd to relate to in Clark Kent. Leftists are always saying that black people need representation. Well, nerds need representation too.
Oh. Going down, please. Going down. Going down.
Going up, up.
Getting down to about time.
Take a flight right there.
Look, the race swapping thing can happen with characters that nobody cares about, like Nick Fury or Aquaman. Nobody cares about them. But if a character is truly beloved, truly iconic, it's a disservice. But you know what? Even this side character thing is getting out of hand. I've said this for about a year now. If you knew nothing about the world, right, and you just watched TV commercials these days, you would think that white people were actually a minority in America. Now, the MCU did actually a very good job of this. They didn't race swap a ton of characters. Most of the characters stayed the same. It was actually pretty good. But things are very quickly changing. And the same thing can now be said of comic books. So many characters are black and Hispanic or Asian that comic book demographics no longer resemble real-world demographics in America. And there is a cumulative effect here. Because you can race swap white characters into other ethnicities, but you cannot race swap other ethnicities into white characters, characters are just becoming less and less white. And they've been race swapping white characters for years now. Perry White, Jimmy Olsen, Catwoman, Batwoman, Commissioner Gordon, Deadshot, Nick Fury, Johnny Storm, Domino, Kingpin, Electro from Spider-Man, Flash Thompson, Mary Jane Watson, Iris West, Wally West, Hawkgirl. One thing's kind of funny. They seem to like to change redheads into black people for some reason. I don't know what's up with that. I guess Hollywood's into gingercide. That is the genocide of fictional gingers. The Norse mythological god Heimdall, who features in the Thor comics, they turned him black. Not sure how a Norseman is black, but so it is. And speaking of black Norsemen, Brunhilde is now black. Imagine if they made some African gods white in a movie. Imagine the outcry. But no respect for cultural history when it's European. I mean, I know it's a comic book, but still, no respect. And actually, this is a very critical point, because a lot of this is about the mythological characters of a particular culture, right? Superman was created in an era in which America was very much white. I mean, it was mostly white, and most of the characters were white. Superman was white, and this is a character from American history that we all love and respect. It's almost like a mythological character at this point. You wouldn't want to change the Greek gods to be various other races. You wouldn't want to switch up the Norse gods, various other races. I mean, you wouldn't want to make Aztec mythological characters white. You wouldn't want to make Asian mythological characters white. You wouldn't want to make African gods white. Why would you want to make European gods black? Why would you want to make European or American mythological characters like Superman? I mean, Superman is essentially like a modern day mythological character. Why would you want to race swap him? Like, it's very disrespectful of the culture in which he was created. Very disrespectful. And you know what? There are actually a ton of other characters that Hollywood and the comic books are trying to race swap to be less white, but the list is already getting kind of annoyingly long, so I'm going to stop there. And look, I understand the motivation for this. Nobody wants to be called racist. And since the 90s, people have been terrified of this label. And so companies and individuals alike have naturally positioned themselves against this label by making a lot of characters black or Hispanic or whatever, right? This is the way they defend themselves. All right, so obviously I had to have a costume change. I ran out of time yesterday trying to shoot this video, so I had to continue recording it the next day. So this is the next day, and I apologize for that. I'm not used to doing videos for 2 days. It takes me 2 days to shoot, but I had a very busy day yesterday. So with that, let us continue. Look, our society is not better because more and more white characters from iconic franchises are being race swapped. There's nothing great about that. And it rarely sticks anyway. I mean, it stuck with Nick Fury, it stuck with Iris West, but I doubt in every iteration of Superman, Perry White will forever be black because of Lawrence Fishburne's forgettable performance in the Zack Snyder films.
Perry, come on, it's me we're talking about. I'm a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter.
Then act like it.
Print it or I walk.
You can't. You're under contract. I'm not running a story about aliens walking among us. Never gonna happen.
Commissioner Gordon will not continue to be black because of Jeffrey Wright. And yeah, that movie hasn't come out yet, but is Jeffrey Wright going to revolutionize the role of Commissioner Gordon? No, of course not. The reason Nick Fury works, the reason that Iris West works, is because nobody knew who those characters were until they were played by black actors. But Commissioner Gordon was already established, first in the comics, then very strongly in the animated series, and perhaps most notably by Gary Oldman. Commissioner Gordon is strongly established. We know who he is, much like Perry White and Jimmy Olsen and Mary Jane, etc. You can't race swap characters that we already know well. It doesn't work. It's just a cheap stunt, and we all, as a society, tend to roll our eyes and dismiss it. You occasionally find an exception like Aquaman, but people love Jason Momoa so much that it transcends this problem. That's a very rare exception. Look, if they hire Jason Momoa merely because he's not white, then they're morons, and they just got really lucky. But if they hired him because he's a freaking star, and they knew he would be an awesome Aquaman, well, good for them, smart filmmakers. But Gordon, well, this is just stupid. Even black comic book nerds find this annoying.
This is stupid. It's unnecessary. They went out of their way, or they're going out of their way to try to find somebody black to play Jim Gordon, who is not a black guy. You're going to get those that say, well, it's a different universe. They can do whatever they want with the character. You're going to get those that say, well, race isn't important to the character, so it doesn't matter. Then you're going to get those that say, he's maybe the best person for this role. No, and no. They don't care about, ruining characters. I just don't know what it is these guys in these race changes. It's so unnecessary. It's so unnecessary. Cast them how they look, There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. They are going out of their way to cast people in these roles that are different races to signal to you losers that eat it up every time that they do it. Golly, man, it's just crazy to me that I have to keep revisiting this every single new movie that comes out that's based off a Marvel or DC comic.
Now, the biggest problem with making all of these characters black, especially a character as iconic as Superman, the reason most people are repelled by this idea is the implied accusation of racism of ordinary Americans. White Americans, especially conservatives, we've been accused of being racist as a group for a very long time now. It really ramped up in the 1990s, but today it's basically a nonstop barrage. Between Twitter and CNN, we're basically told that we're racist every second of every day. We are very aware of what Hollywood thinks of white Americans, basically that we are irredeemably racist and that they need to teach us not to be racist by forcing us to contend with their overt anti-racist messaging in every film and television show they produce. Their thought process is this: let's make a black Superman. That'll make people really uncomfortable, and they'll have to be introspective and think about how racist they are. But we're not uncomfortable about black Superman because we hate black people. We're uncomfortable with black Superman because Superman's not black. Clark Kent isn't black. That's not the character. It's annoying when you do that, when you put it in our face and you call us racist. We don't need this lecturing. We don't need the berating. We don't need you to make Superman black for us to look at ourselves in the mirror, realize how horrible we are, and change our ways. The truth is, we don't care about race. And every time you make this casting choice to create a story to tackle this problem in America, you are just insulting everybody watching. Most white Americans, well, they're just not total morons, all right? They are aware of the accusations against them. They realize that the accusations are unfounded, and they deal with it in whatever way they see fit. And most of the time that they deal with that is just by turning off the TV, by not going to the movie theater. You are pushing people away. You are pushing audiences out of the theaters. You're stopping them watching your shows with all your SJW garbage, pointing fingers, calling us all racist. It doesn't help you, and it's not accurate anyway. Americans don't need Hollywood to tell them they're racist in every single movie. Look, if Americans genuinely believed that Black Superman was just a creative take on the character, we certainly wouldn't love it, because Superman's not black. But there would indeed be one less layer of resentment whenever you guys do something like this. Many people, like myself, who find this sort of thing patronizing, well, we might instead find it somewhat intriguing. If we genuinely believe that these casting and plot choices were not motivated by smug, condescending, derisive filmmakers that have nothing but contempt for their audience, we wouldn't hate Hollywood, and we wouldn't hate the garbage that you guys are producing. Now, that's not to say that these projects would be particularly popular. Maybe they would be, and maybe they wouldn't. But I can tell you this: a story motivated by creative ideas is far more likely to be good than one motivated by radical left politics. These companies justify their political activism by pretending to be listening to the woke mob on Twitter. And the woke mob on Twitter is very loud and very obnoxious. There is a particularly sinister community online, and they are known as Stans, S-T-A-N-S. This is a community I'd actually never heard of until about a week ago. This term comes from the Eminem song Stan and has been speculated to be a portmanteau of stalker and fan. Anyway, these stans are apparently young people online who are obsessed with celebrity culture and Hollywood and all that stuff. So these stans are at the tip of the spear when it comes to shaming Hollywood into pushing diversity stuff, LGBT, XYZ stuff, and feminist stuff. But as far as the numbers go, overtly woke fiction doesn't sell well. The primary problem with this stuff is that it's just not good, and the primary selling point of any work of fiction is that it's good. I read somewhere that cancel culture is just the free market in action, but this is absolutely false. The free market works when people actively engage in things that they like and passively avoid things they don't like. The woke mob is a very small number of people who are very actively attacking things that they don't like until companies modify their behavior. Sometimes these companies modify their behavior by hiring black people or women or gays, lesbians, trans folk. Sometimes they modify their behavior by firing people that the woke mob doesn't like. It's not one that's compelled by the free market. It's one that's been manipulated by a small band of a-holes. And look, these stands, they aren't buying the products that they're insisting companies produce. Whenever a company tries to produce a woke version of something, it inevitably ends up doing very badly. And that's where the phrase, get woke, go broke, comes from. Conservatives aren't a particularly resentful bunch. We don't often boycott leftist companies, even when they do something egregious. The problem is that wokeness often weakens the product, whether it's a story or a safety razor. A focus on wokeness will sometimes distract from just making a great product. And when that happens, people move on to other products. This is why the comic book industry is dying. While American comics are focused on identity politics, comic book fans are moving on to Japanese manga. This is a massive trend that may end up killing the comic book industry entirely. So what's the answer to this? How do we reestablish great fiction in a society obsessed with woke identity politics? Easy. The comic book industry and Hollywood need to start hiring conservative writers. And there are two reasons for this. First reason, conservatives don't care about injecting overtly political messages into their stories. Consider C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Frederick Forsyth, he wrote Day of the Jackal, Tom Clancy, Jon Favreau. His Iron Man movie basically sparked the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Mandalorian essentially saved Star Wars. There are tons of examples of amazing films and TV shows, novels, and comic book characters written by or created by conservatives, and they're some of the best stories ever created. Leftists can create good stuff when they're not bogged down by expressing leftist messages. Filmmakers like Steven Spielberg and James Cameron, they're staunch Democrats, but in the 1980s and 1990s, everything they made was conservative. Jaws, Indiana Jones, Minority Report, Terminator, Aliens, True Lies. None of these films have overt leftist messages, and they're all great. In fact, there's a lot of anti-big government messages and traditional Christian values in these movies. Superman is precisely the same. I don't know if Richard Donner is a Republican or a Democrat. I mean, I assume he's a Democrat. But his films are brimming with conservative messages and traditional values. I'm not sure you could find a film that promotes traditional values better than the first Superman movie. And the second reason that conservatives are better writers than leftists is that conservatives understand human nature. So there's this word that filmmakers like to use. The word is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude is the appearance of things being true or real. The basic idea is that because fictional stories aren't real, you have to present them in a very realistic way, as realistic as possible, so that the audience is able to immerse themselves in the fiction. People want to be convinced that the fantasy they're experiencing is real. I mean, at least temporarily. And so they tend to forgive a lot of unrealistic stuff in films, but you can't go so far outside reality that people just say, okay, now this is just getting ridiculous. The best way to create verisimilitude in a film is to have characters act and react in a way that seems natural. That is, their motivations and intentions should make sense, and their reactions should be believable. And this is a huge problem for leftist writers today, because leftists, they're all trained in this neo-Marxist, postmodernist identity politics, power structure mumbo-jumbo that just doesn't make sense to ordinary people. It only makes sense to intersectional feminists, people who graduated from black colleges, and the morons who write radical left comic books and movies. People who've been brainwashed. Regular folks don't relate to that stuff, and they don't relate to it for one simple reason. It doesn't make any sense. The truth is that radical leftists live in a false reality. They live in a reality where every white person is racist, where all men are misogynists, where society is controlled by racist white guys who don't want women or black people to succeed. They live in a world where white supremacy is the biggest threat we face as a nation, where big is beautiful, and where we're only conditioned to fit healthy-looking women, that this is somehow unnatural. They live in a world where men can be women just by imagining it. They live in a world where gays are always born that way, and where the 2020 election was totally legit. And look, people just don't see this stuff in real life. We don't see white supremacists roaming the streets hunting down black people. We don't see women being told they'll never succeed merely because they're a woman. And so when these radical leftists write stories based on this bizarre false reality, regular people don't relate to it. The realism is all lost. There is no verisimilitude. Conservatives write worlds that are identifiable, characters that are relatable, because conservatives don't see the world in terms of power structures, and we're willing to depict the human condition as it truly is. And conservatives recognize that changing an iconic character's race will make that character unrecognizable. You can't just make Superman black because no one will accept that this is Superman. And I get the desire to change things up. I get that. But if you want to change things up, there are many other things that you can do with the character. If you want to make a new kind of Superman that has not been explored in films before, might I suggest Old Man Superman? This is a concept that's been explored several times in comic books. Much of the time, he sports a big Santa beard. And you know what? I love this idea. I love the idea of Old Man Superman. They did it with Old Man Wolverine in the film Logan, and that film was universally praised. I mean, I might have written that script a little differently, but the idea of Old Man Wolverine was cool. Everybody loved that. And I think Old Man Superman would be awesome too. My point is that in order to do something different with a well-established character, you don't have to make them black or a woman or gay or whatever. There's tons of other ways to explore a character without changing their fundamental characteristics. On the bright side, this black Superman film, if it's as much of a dumpster fire as I imagine it will be, well, then this will only serve to hasten the end of Hollywood wokeness, either by hitting them where it hurts the most in the pocketbook, or, if they fail to recognize their inevitable decline, by ending Hollywood altogether. So long as they keep making The Last Jedi and crap like that, Hollywood is destined to fade into obscurity. There are just too many brilliant creative people outside of Hollywood now, and if they don't fix things, they will die. They need to sort themselves out. Furthermore, this will not destroy Superman. As with all the terrible incarnations and changes to Superman through history, this will come and go. It'll be forgotten like all the other terrible mistakes. Whatever they do to the character, in whatever way they make Superman black, this is not going to end up being a permanent change. Because those things that make iconic characters iconic, well, those are things that transcend the passing fashions of the day. They are what endure. So, at the end of the day, although we currently have to suffer through more of our iconic characters being mangled before our very eyes, eventually things will reset, because that's the way things go. And eventually, like with The Mandalorian, somebody who respects the legacy of the Man of Steel will take up the mantle, and they will produce a blockbuster film or iconic television series. This filmmaker will very likely be a conservative. And when that happens, the character will once again inspire kids to stand for truth, justice, and the American way. Well, that's it for me, and remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
Together, with God's help, we can and will resolve the problems which now confront us. And after all, why shouldn't we believe that? We are Americans.